So the topic of my presentation today obviously is user-centered design is dead, and really what I'm going to be talking about today is what we call stakeholder-centered design. We feel user-centered design is pretty limited in how you may think about it, and so therefore we want to kind of talk about that's kind of the thing of the past, and we kind of need to think more holistically, look at the bigger picture, and I'll kind of walk you through those steps. As far as the presentation goes today, I'll talk about a little bit of the differences between user-centered and stakeholder-centered design, why it's important, why you want to think a little bit bigger picture, and then I'll actually walk you through the 5 steps that we take to actually go through this process. I'm going to show you an example of how we did something to essentially come up with a journey map at the end, mapped over with workflow, stakeholders, and identifying pain points. Before I get started, just a little bit about M3 Design. So we're a product development firm based in Austin, Texas. We work with many companies, both in the healthcare space as well as outside. And what we do is we really work with our clients to identify how to meet their business objectives through great product design and user experiences. Here's some of the products we've worked on in the past. As you see, it's a variety of things, everything from dental products to surgical space, to consumer goods and even machine design. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk about the difference between user versus stakeholder-centered design. All of you probably have one of these in your pocket today or on the table. Hopefully you're not looking at it right now. But there are certain products that user-centered design is a great methodology. A phone like this, the person who purchases it is usually the person that also takes it out of the box, sets it up, loads up all the apps that they want and uses it on a day-to-day basis until the next one comes out, and then you either turn it in or give it to your kid as an MP3 player. But when we look at other products line and we start thinking about in the healthcare market, here's an example of an MRI machine. So who is a user? Is it a patient? Is it the rad tech here that's actually responsible of collecting good data? Is it a radiologist who's not even in the room, who's responsible of looking at the output of this image and determining a diagnosis? Or is it the patient, the physician who ordered it? How about the healthcare insurance companies who are the ones that are going to be paying for it or otherwise? So when we talk about user-centered design, we want to kind of look big picture and not just focus on just who's the primary user during the in-use environment. One thing we see a lot with many companies that's developing the product is they really focus on the end use, the person who's primarily using the product, and it's by far, it's very important. But I mean, in the example of an MRI machine, there's lots of other stakeholders involved. So understanding who those are is pretty key. And then if you take it a little bit step deeper and map out the overall workflow, not just in the use, but how does someone decide to purchase this product? And who's involved in that process? So oftentimes in medical devices, the person purchasing it never actually uses the product. So what are they looking for that allows your product to be sold in the first place before it can even be used? There's different people who are responsible for setting it up or making sure that it's in operation and ready to go before the procedure. Obviously, there's what happens during the actual use of the therapy or applying the therapy. And then something goes wrong, and it will. Who's responsible for making sure that product is back up and running and able to do what it's intended to do? And then also you gotta think about what happens at the very end, which is how you dispose of the product, because there may be some regulations there to think about. So let's talk about why this is important. Like I mentioned before, we use this journey map just to identify the different steps. But a lot of times when we talk to clients and work through a new product, they're really focusing on what happens during the procedure, and they may have some understanding what happens prior to it. But what we like to do is look at the big picture. What happens at the very beginning, who's setting it up, who's responsible for making sure this thing's working, and then what happens afterwards. So we actually follow the product within the hospital system, or even if it's at the home care product, all the way along the way. And the reason this is important is once a product is used, say in a spinal, what's shown here, This is an example I'll show here in a little bit. But in spinal instrumentation, once it's done, it goes downstairs into the hospital area, an area called sterile processing. And this individual here on the right is responsible for cleaning it. If you talk to these users, you often find out that the person cleaning it is maybe has a high school degree, maybe not. And the turnover rate, or how often these employees are staying in this job, is very low. So you've got untrained individuals, you have people who really don't have a lot of love for their job, responsible to making sure that your product gets cleaned properly between uses. Oh, and by the way, how many different flavors of this product or types of products are they seeing each day? And they're expected then at that point to understand exactly how to best clean that. And so the reason why we like to think about big picture and understand all these different steps is we don't want something like this happening, right? We don't want your product to fail because maybe it wasn't designed properly because you hadn't considered maybe some of the limitations or relying on individuals to do the job right, such as cleaning the system. Even though you might put together cleaning instructions and post them on the wall, the chances of them understanding that and always reading that may not happen. And then the reason you do this too is as you talk to stakeholders and understand, as you're adding new features, you start identifying, you may have some introducing new unintended users or stakeholders. And so with this, it's a good risk mitigation process. Product development is all about risk mitigation. How you go about it. Obviously, you got to do your design controls and everything else. But if you look at it from a business risk perspective, understanding the overall workflow allows you to identify potential risk areas. So let's go through the 5 steps of stakeholder-centered design. These are the 5, and I'm going to go into each one by one. So the first thing you do is you map out the journeys I kind of showed before, identify all the steps that happen from the very beginning to the very end, identify the list of stakeholders that are involved, and then map those two together. Find out who's responsible for doing what job at what point. What this allows you to do is you identify unknowns. You might find out that you don't know a lot of information in a certain area. And the next one is that you want to fill those gaps of knowledge. So let's take a deep dive in one of these examples. So since I showed the instrumentation of a spinal system, I want to use this example of a spinal deformity system. Essentially it's a product that is used to treat things like scoliosis and requires a lot of hardware in order to correct the deformity of a patient. As you can see here in the middle, this is showing the surgical team at work. They're engaging with lots of tools, they're engaging with lots of equipment, and so understanding the end use is very chaotic and everything else. But in order for this procedure to go well, everything needs to be in place, ready to go before it even starts. So first thing we want to do is map out the product journey. Just ask yourselves, what are the steps during the product journey? Put them all up. So in this case, what's also kind of unique with this system is that sometimes the instrumentation set is not actually at the hospital all the time. Sales reps or sales distributors actually are the owners of the product. They don't actually sell it to the hospital. The implants that get put in are what gets sold. And so what they do is they manage that inventory. The other thing too is that the implants are actually packaged with in the sterilization cases with the instrumentation. So all those need to be ready to go, and they're not actually boxed off on the side. And so the sales rep actually has to deliver this set to the hospital prior to the procedure. They need to go through the hospital protocols for cleaning and sterilization, and then the surgical team will then make sure it's ready to go before the patient comes in, and then they'll do the procedure. And afterwards, that case goes all the way back downstairs, gets cleaned, and the sales rep grabs it and maybe takes it to another location. So there's a lot of things happening that aren't in the procedure. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Part of this is we look at workflows or what's happening at each step. For the in use, there's certain surgical technique or workflow that's happening, so we'll map that out, and we'll map it out for each of the other journey steps, such as the deliver, the setup, and everything else. And when we do this with our clients, we notice is we do this on the wall with Post-it notes. And the nice thing is a visual representation of how much knowledge we have. Oftentimes we find out that we have a lot of information that happens in the procedure, but all these ancillary steps earlier on and afterwards, there's really not a whole lot of information that's known, and that identifies maybe some gaps in knowledge. Next thing we do is we identify the list of stakeholders. In this case, you've got obviously the surgeon or the physician. And by the way, there's two personas of that. There is a neurosurgeon and an orthopedic surgeon, and they have very different needs of what they're looking for. We have a scrub tech, who's the assistant, who's one that's responsible for setting up the room and handing the instruments from the back table to the surgeon and keeping up with their pace. You have an coordinator, who's responsible for scheduling and works with the sales rep. There's a circulating nurse who's responsible for just making sure the team has what they need. Obviously, there's a sales rep who's there to make money. And then you have the sterile processing employees, and then you have others as well. So we map this out, and then what we do is we then put these all together, and we kind of figure out which stakeholders are involved in which step. And in this case, we have the livers, mainly the sales rep, and so on and so forth. You see during the procedure, there's a lot of people involved, but there's some key stakeholders earlier on and later on that have nothing to do with the procedure itself. So step 4 is identifying the unknowns. And the reason we do this is to identify what research techniques or what research we need to go do. How do we fill those gaps in knowledge? So what we'll do is we'll ask things like, what are some of these journey steps that we don't know about? Many times our client has a really good understanding in one area, but has never followed the products from the whole landscape. Maybe they're the people that we're talking to aren't experts in that area, and we need to gather some other input from other people within the organization. We also identify what stakeholders might be underserved or ignored. A lot of times it's like, well, we don't worry about them. They don't have any impact on the product. But the reality is that anyone that touches your product has some ability to impact how successful that product is once it comes out to market. And of course, what and who are we ignoring? And it's okay to ignore this. I'm not saying that you have to go through this process, but what you're doing is you're adding risk to your overall product design. You can go through your design controls and have your user needs all identified and everything else and still get a product to market. What I'm talking about is how do you take this product to the next level? How do you develop new innovative products? How do you identify unmet needs? How do you identify future business opportunities that maybe aren't happening today? So once we have all the gaps identified, what we'll do is we'll develop a research plan, and then we'll execute on that research plan. This is usually a combination with us, the client, if they have a research partner too, possibly. But what we do is we identify who's going to get what information and execute it, and then we'll use appropriate research techniques in order to gather that and bring it back to the table. And once we do that, we oftentimes find things that we were wrong about, or things that we didn't think about, or new stakeholders, new steps that we had never considered. But we also identify potential pain points. What are things that people just struggle with or are unable to, or just get in their way of the ability to provide effective care. And then also identify unmet needs, so things that people really wish in a product, but they currently aren't able to do. The other thing we find out is things like workarounds. There's many times you go in a surgery, and I remember one case, the surgeon was using a navigation system and had a touch screen, but the surgical team couldn't touch the screen. He had to communicate to the circulating nurse to say, hit this button, do this. So what he ended up doing was getting a coker or a towel clip and stuck it on top of the monitor. And what that allowed him to do was the tip of the coker was dirty, but the handle was clean. So he could grab that coker, touch the screen, jam it back into the actual monitor. It's funny what you find out unless you go out in the field and actually see it for yourself. So this is what a journey map looks like. I know it's an eyesore, so I'm going to try to walk you through this. I know the presentations will be shared later. If you want to get this earlier, let me know. I can send it to you later today if you'd like. But what we do is we map out things from all the different steps here, kind of on the x-axis, and then here is like the locations or or areas that we're talking about. So what this goes from is, let's actually walk you through it. First thing we do is, this is the sales rep gets a call from the org coordinator and finds out that Surgeon Y has this procedure coming up in the day. So first thing that sales rep says, yep, he calls in his main office, makes sure he's got the instrumentation ready to go and he can take it for the whole day. He will then go through a process of making sure that everything in the kit needs to be there. So all the implants in there, all the screws, the rods, the blockers, as well as all the instrumentation. Do we have all that in that case? Because once it gets sterilized, you can't see inside of it until you open it up, and it's too late at that point because you're already surgeon's ready to go. The next step is then they deliver this to sterile processing. They have to work with the org coordinator or sterile processing department, and then first thing they do is they take all the instruments out and then they clean it, put it through a passive cleaner, sterilize it, blue wrap it, or if it's one of these other cases, it's just sterilized, and then they place it into storage by the operator. And then there's the pre-operative planning, so things that happen before the procedure starts. You've got the circulating nurse and the scrub tech getting the room ready. They're setting it up. They're bringing all the cases and trays and they're opening it. They get gowned up. They transfer all the sterile implants and instrumentation onto the back table. They also bring the patient in, and then they do a timeout before the procedure starts. The surgeon usually just comes in at the very end and is ready to go as soon as let them figure it out. I'm too busy, and I'll just come in and start right away. So we map that out, and then we also map out what happens during the procedure. You see there's a lot of steps, kind of things I showed before. There's actually a parallel step here, because what's happening at the surgical table is above, and what's happening at the back table, the circulating nurse is down below. And the circulating nurse is kind of trying to quickly go back and forth and hand instrumentation. The challenge too is some of these that's scrub tech. Challenge is the scrub tech may not be very familiar with this set of instrumentation. They may have done mainly cardio cases in the past, and someone called in sick and they had to assist in this room. And so they're all of a sudden expected to understand what the workflow is, what instrument is, what it is, and there's tons of instruments. So what happens is we have a sales rep in the room with a laser pointer kind of helping and guiding the circulator. So now you have the sales rep in the room too, kind of babysitting the procedure and telling a joke and otherwise. So the procedure goes on. They do lots of screws, so that's why this little squiggly note, because they have to do tons and tons of screws and rods. So they go through the process, and then once the surgery's done and they've gone through that process, they gather instruments and then get it ready, send it back downstairs, gets cleaned, and the sales rep grabs it and then rushes off to the next procedure at another hospital. Very inefficient and whatnot. Now, each product is a little bit different, right? So what we do is we look at the overall product journey and the stakeholders, and what we find out is that there's always something that we learn in it. So what we do is we map out our pain points. So what's shown in red is just some areas. There are some opportunities. There's a lot more that we came up with, but I just wanted to highlight just a few ones. But number one is this whole inventory, or expecting the sales rep to make sure all the implants and instrumentation is there. It's time consuming, it's inefficient. It's not allowing them to be a salesperson. Now they're a materials management person, right? And transporter driving through back and forth. You've got inefficiencies where sterile processing is taking these kits out and re-cleaning instruments when maybe there's opportunities there that could be identified. The back table, there's lots of instruments. They're expected to know it. And then what's seen here in red is to do this procedure, you need to bring this big C-arm in the way and take fluoro shots, usually an AP or a lateral shot. And when you do that, the flow of the surgery stops. Essentially, you got to get out and you got to wait. The surgeon has to talk to a stakeholder we didn't identify until we went through the process, which is this little other rad tech, who's the person responsible for moving the C-arm in and out of the operating room, transporting from the different shots. And it's just inefficient. And the surgeon also has a very weird posture, because they're trying to do their product, their design or implantation, and they're getting around this big, bulky instrument. Now, it's just, you might say, well, that's just how it's done. Well, why? I mean, this is to ask ourselves. We're trying to improve healthcare and come up with new ideas. Why are we letting certain technology get in the way? Maybe there's an opportunity there to identify some new ways or better ways to do this procedure that's more effective and efficient. So the other thing this does, it provides a good framework for concept development. So once you've done this research, you've mapped it out, we print out big plots of this, and we have it with us and the client teams. It's a great reference to kind of talk through things of why are we designing what we're doing. Obviously, you get lost when you go user design requirements, and there's 100+ things on that list. What this gives up a really good idea, visual to the team is what's important and what are some things outside of just making this product safe and effective. How can we make a better user experience to your stakeholders? So to sum it all up, surgeons are impatient and they want a lot. But the reality is there's a lot that happens before, after, during the procedure. And this goes with any product that you might be working on. And so kind of going through this process, I think what we're trying to come out with is a better understanding of the big picture. And the reason we do that is because we want to take inventory of all the stakeholders who are interacting with your product. We identify those knowledge gaps and decide, do we need to come up or find more information in that area, or are we okay moving forward with this project with potentially at risk? We then execute on appropriate research techniques. Not every technique out there is appropriate, so we kind of need to figure out, based upon what you're trying to gather, what the best method is to gather information. You actually update the journey map as you get more and more information. It establishes that concept development framework, but at a high level, it has the potential to identify new product opportunities and even system opportunities, which maybe you're not able to tackle right away, but allows to put things on the roadmap. Here are the 5 steps again. You map the product journey, identify stakeholders, do the stakeholder mapping or journey mapping, find out what's important, and fill gaps of information. We publish on this. If you like, here's a couple links to a white paper related to stakeholder-centered design, also an ebook, and then we have some other publications that we put on our website as well. And we post on these about once a month. Here's my contact information. I'd love to catch up and talk if you have a technique or have a question about this. I'll be around till about 3 o'clock today, but I look forward to continuing discussion. So thank you. I'll open it up for questions at this point.
So sometimes when you're considering the needs of all your stakeholders, there's conflict, there's competing needs. To give one stakeholder what they need means taking it from someplace else. Is there a process for, I'll say, distributing the pain or concentrating the pain, or is there a...
Yeah, I think you have to prioritize. Once you have all this information, at the end of the day, you still need to prioritize things. So you may need to prioritize things due to, safety, or people might want something, but you can't deliver that to them because it may be unsafe. Yeah. But you might prioritize it based upon marketing needs or what their influence is in maybe purchasing the product or using the product. So not every stakeholder and step in the journey is at equal steps. You kind of have to go through a process of prioritizing, and we do a thing called success drivers. That's like a 10,000 foot view of what success means in this product. What that allows us to do is when we develop concepts in that, we can score those against those success drivers and make sure that we're still on track to make a product that will be successful in the market. So.
A question about how you kind of identify your stakeholders. So, you identify the stakeholders as people who interact with the program or the product for its kind of life cycle. And for MD&M, they very loosely define user not as just the primary end user, but also, people who work in transport, storage, processing. How do you get around the fact, or do you get around the fact that that means if you design for these people who are users, you have to then validate your design with 15 people for each of these types?
So that's, the journey map is separate than your design requirements, and so I think that's where the prioritization is. In terms of as you identify the different stakeholders and what their needs, it comes down to what the FDA is looking for, what's safe and effective. They don't care if you make money. They don't care if you deliver a good user experience. What they care is that you don't hurt anyone or harm anyone. And so keep that in mind when you're developing and identify some things you might be looking at more from a business perspective, or you're trying to deliver a better customer experience than maybe your competition or otherwise.
Do you have any tools to identify the unknowns? Because we had a few projects where you kind of don't know until you know it, that you're kind of behind the eight ball.
Yeah. So we start every project with this process, regardless of when the client comes into us. They may have had like some user research and everything else. So what we do is we map out what the information is already there. We use this dirty map. Really it's about identifying where areas of information you don't know, or challenging assumptions. They come to you and say, it needs to do X, Y, Z, you say why, and try to really dig in deeper into there. As you go out to the field, as you do research, as you learn things, you find new stakeholders, new stuff that you hadn't considered, and then you decide if you want to go off and start doing some more research there. Now, you don't go into this research for research's sake. You still have this timeline you got to meet. You have a budget. So what you do there is you just make sure you prioritize things and make sure that you identify the risk. Like, it's okay to go through a product design with not having known every single stakeholder in every product journey. What you're doing there at that point is you're adding risk, and you may be missing potential product opportunities that you could release in the product, either with that one or future product lines.
Have you done this with like a very innovative sort of like new procedures? Because a lot of the surgical stuff, the orthopedic, I mean, I've worked in orthopedics for a couple of years, and it all seems like kind of similar and just like an incremental change to a current existing product. Is there anything that you've done where it's like brand new ball game?
So we worked on a project, Striker Bone Mill, that we developed with them, and we went through this process, mapped it out. What we identified at that point was an unmet need. We looked at, I can't tell you what it is, because it's not in the market yet, but we identified this unmet need. Marketing was really excited about it. We should do this. And we did some feasibility testing and realized, hey, this is a lot harder to do than we thought. And the reason they had us work with them on the bone mill is that Medtronic had a product, and it was all about speed of market and filling a portfolio gap, right? So by adding this new feature, although it would have been great, it wasn't addressing their immediate business objective. So we actually recommended we table that new idea and just focus on the original one. So we tabled that. They came out with the bone mill. It's been successful, and they reached out to us, and we went through this process of identifying a new way of doing something that hadn't been done in the past. And with that is, it's hard to, people have a hard time envisioning how to do something that they don't have a reference for. So we had to use different techniques, mock-ups, different concepts to help paint the picture as we're talking about the idea, to get new user feedback and understanding, and then iterate it along that way. So.
In the mock-ups, did you have like real physicians and scrub techs and stuff?
Yep.
Walk through in a pretend kind of scenario?
Yes. So we'd have mock-ups, we created a discussion guide, we would kind of simulate this. We had cadaver labs, we've done lots of things that we've facilitated and supported in order to kind of get some good information. And it's you gotta go into those things with an open mind, because they may say, hey, this is not a good idea, right? Or you may find out that you're really in love with this idea, but at the end of the day, they're not willing to pay for it. And at that point, then the engineer, I think, or designer, or whoever might think it's a great idea, but that's where you want to find that early on. All right, well, thank you very much. Again, if you need these slides, let me know, and we'll all be around. So.